Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are now on step 4 of the Steps to Freedom 12-step recovery work. And so welcome back to that. If you haven't seen any of the prior videos in this series, I would encourage you to go back, look for step 1, and then kind of make your way through there because each step builds on the work of the previous step. So joining in right now would be a little bit confusing. So the goal of this study continues to be just to demystify each step one by one, make it as approachable as possible when you go to do your own step work using this Steps to Freedom workbook. Other books do exist. This is just the one that has been used in the ReGroup group that we all attend. But yeah, other good options do exist as well. So my goal for today is to talk about step 4 to give you a brief introduction to it and a snapshot about what it's all about. I would invite anybody who's listening to, if you have the Steps to Freedom workbook, to just crack it while I'm going through this and just, familiarize yourself with what's in there. The whole goal is to make it approachable and easy for people to jump in with. So please do that if you have the ability. And yeah, treat this workbook like a journal. Write down everything that comes to mind when it asks you a question. Just do your best to answer it completely. So step 4, the step tells us, or is called, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And a Bible verse that kind of goes with that gives some kind of a picture of that is Lamentations 3:40, which says, "Let us examine our ways and test them, and let us return to the Lord." So as a reminder, the word "we" is used instead of "I" all the way through the 12 steps because the 12-step program is meant to be completed in community. It's not meant to be done alone. The odds or the chance of completing it individually is really slim. So it's really important to be able to have people that can encourage you in that journey, and ideally people that are walking alongside you at the same time. So yeah, jumping into step 4. Up until this point, some serious life reorientation has occurred during the first 3 steps. And now we're going to practically start working out that change by starting the process of cleaning out our closet. That's really what step 4 is all about. As a review, in step 1, we realized that we have a fatal addiction problem. In step 2, we believed that God could be a solution to that problem. And in step 3, we committed our life and our daily decision-making to him. So that's what we've done before this, and that's why it'd be good to start there and then work your way forwards because you can't jump ahead in this process. So step 4 begins the process of coming clean. It is here that we openly examine our faults. We chip away and clean out all the decay of the past that has built up over the years and has kept us from really seeing the truth about our past and our present situations. So why do we have to create a list? Step 4 is all about creating a list, writing down the things that we've done to others and things that have been done to us, and the things that we're most ashamed of. So why do we have to do that? In order to take true ownership of our actions so that we can be forgiven for them and forgive others later, we need to be courageous and stop running and hiding from the shame of our past actions or things that have been done to us. While seeing a list of these things on paper, these things that we're ashamed of, is really hard, it is the only way to grow and the only way to be fully known so that we can be cleansed by God's forgiveness. The Bible talks a lot about sharing these things that we're most fearful of, the things that we're ashamed of, so that we can begin the healing process. And so it's essential that that is done in a thorough way. So creating a list of our hurtful actions that we've committed or have been done to us is hard and must be done in the context of a sacred time and space. You won't be able to create such a list while having friends, family, or other distractions around you. So when it comes to the mechanics of actually getting this work done, I would encourage you to set aside a number of hours to get alone with God and ask him to bring to mind all the things that he wants you to get right on. Prayerfully seek God's will and write down everything that comes to mind. It is important to do a thorough step 4, again, to create a list. And the workbook kind of gives it a bit of a structure for that. It divides it up into 2 main sections. But it's even more important to not get stuck on this step. This is one of the big, maybe 3 steps that people often get stuck on. So what I have said throughout this group, and I'll continue to say it, is to set a time, for example, a month, in which you will work on step 4, and then add anything that comes to mind during that time and write it all down, and don't be afraid or don't censor anything. And then after that month, and talk to God about that and make that commitment to him. Say, God, I'm gonna I want to do this step 4 right. I want you to inspire in me and put in my mind anything that I need to get off my chest and get off my back. Write every one of those things down in the book that's provided, and then move on. Don't get stuck on that point. Over time, God will bring more things to mind. And when we get to what's called step 10, we can make ongoing amends. So if there is something that comes to mind later, we can still make amends for that. We can still do things to address that, or we can do the steps all over again. And for myself, I've done it a number of times, and I treat it more like a taking medication when I'm sick. I just do it when there's something in my life that's built up, and then I go through the whole 12-step process again. But that'll depend on who you are and the time you have available. So yeah, set a time or set a certain amount of time, and then move on after that. So the goals of step 4 are basically twofold. The first is to begin to shed our old lifestyle by creating a thorough list of all the harmful things that we've done to others and have been done to us. So that's the first thing, create the list. And as a way of doing that well, we need to be thorough and not hide or omit 1 or 2 things that we really don't want to admit to others. It's really important if there's things that come to mind that we're like, oh, I can't tell anybody that thing. That's exactly what needs to be on this step 4 list. And again, we're not at that point yet where we're telling it to anybody. This is just making the list. So for now, try and put the next step out of your mind as much as you can. Just work on making the list for now. But really, the only way to be fully free of these things and not let any backdoor channels of this addiction come back is to be thorough and to get rid of everything at once. So some specific guidance when it comes to working this step in the Steps to Freedom workbook. Again, be prepared for repetitive questions. There's not as much of that in this one. This one is more 2 main sections that ask you to list out just the things that we've done. So the first large section asks you to list your strengths and weaknesses. It's important to note that none of us have been wholly evil in our past lives. And so this acknowledges the strengths part acknowledges the things that we are good or strong at. So it's important to not just be completely doom and gloom, but also to acknowledge strengths. And acknowledging our strengths actually is something that God wants us to be able to do. I know it's hard for a lot of us to write down the things that we're actually good at, but there are many things that God has gifted us with in terms of abilities and temperaments or whatever. And so we need to acknowledge those things. So then the next main section, which occurs around page 42 in the Steps to Freedom book, talks about when it comes to making a list of losses and strengths. This provides an opportunity to acknowledge positive events that have occurred in our life, as well as those which are painful for us or for someone else. I would say in the book itself, it actually divides it up into like age categories, like ages 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, etc. For some of us who are younger, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have only the first 3 or 4 sections available to us, or however many sections are. So I would treat it more like blank space and just write things in. Don't be really hung up on, if there's a lot of stuff that happened to you between the ages of 6 and 10, like just go on into the section that says like ages 11 to 15. Don't let the formatting of the book hold you back from writing down everything you need to write down. So treat this as a guide, but don't be restricted by the way that it formats it, since it only gives you like 3 or 4 lines for every age category. So yeah, so that's kind of what the main step is for this one. It kind of is divided into those main 2 chunks, which asks you to list, again, kind of positive and negative things that have occurred in our lives during that time. So finally, I think step 4 is a really huge one. I would encourage everybody to take that time that's necessary to do it. Some of the other steps are more like almost like a daily or a few times a week exercise that you can kind of do and move on. Step 4 is a bit different. You kind of need a couple, 2 or 3 bigger chunks of time to really do this well, I would suggest. So that involves taking that time, talking to, if there's a spouse in your life, letting them know, hey, I need 2 or 3 hours on a Saturday to go away by myself and not be distracted by anyone or anything. And they can support you in achieving that. Or if you're single, then that's fine. You just need to create a setting where you're not going to be distracted. Don't do it right next to your phone or your computer or whatever might distract you. So get time alone with God, whatever that looks like. So again, when it comes to ideally sharing this with somebody later, just start the things that come to mind. There was a few sections that I felt were particularly they kind of opened the doors of my heart a little bit. It was things that I felt vulnerable or ashamed of. And so I wanted to talk about them when I shared it with somebody else. And again, if you have the opportunity to talk to someone as like a sponsor person, I would definitely encourage that, especially when we get to step 5, the next step. The whole idea is you're going to be sharing this step 4 list with somebody else. So please, if you haven't already, identify somebody who could be your sponsor for that, especially because the real impact of this step is not only seeing it on paper, but it's also confessing it to God and another person. So we'll get to that later. But for today and for the next month or whatever time you're working on it, just focus on writing the list and don't be overwhelmed by whatever might come next. So yeah. So that is most everything that I wanted to talk about. Again, I would just encourage people to be as thorough as possible, but don't get stuck. There will inevitably things that you do that do not come to mind. So don't let that captivate you or hold you back. Just write down everything that comes to mind within a given time period, and ask God to inspire those things in your mind when you go to think about these things. And anything that comes to mind, just off the cuff, maybe after you did your main list, if something comes to mind, just go back to your book and write it down really quickly before you forget about it. So yeah, I commend you to that, and all the best with working on your step 4. And we will be back again in a month to talk about step 5. So we will end that there, and hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.